Welcome back to part 3 of this tutorial on how to make a jump map. So moving right on, I'm going to continue on with my level creation. And one of the first things I like to do when creating a new map is set up the skybox. So I'm going to bring up the texture tool, Shift A, remember, and I'm going to texture the ceiling with skybox texture. So in the filter I'm going to search for skybox. Alright, so here it is at the bottom, 2D skybox, apply to the ceiling. And what this skybox texture does is creates like an image in the far distance that can make your map look a lot bigger than it really is. I went ahead and compiled this, and as you can see there's now a skybox texture projected onto where I textured with skybox. And this gives you the illusion of a sky even though the block that I textured with skybox is right there. Now you may notice the lighting looks a bit weird. Even though there's a skybox, there's no sunlight, there's no shadows projected from the skybox texture. Not yet anyways, and that's because we need an entity to control that. So back in Hammer, I want sunlight projected from my skybox texture, and to do this I need an entity, so Shift E and select it, double click. I'm going to search for light. And what you want is light environment, and this has a bunch of settings which you can use to control exactly what kind of light comes from the skybox texture as well as the shadows. Now instead of tinkering with the settings in the light environment, I'm just going to go grab a default one. So if you Google Skyless, you'll get to this web page. I'm going to search for TF, and here are all the default skyboxes and light environment settings. So I'm just going to choose Sky Hydro 01, and here are the light environment settings. This is the same exact skybox and light environment setup as TC Hydro, as you can see. So here's my object properties for the light environment. I'm just going to go ahead and copy these values here. So ideal sun angle, that's pitch yaw roll. Ideal sun pitch, that's just the pitch, and so on for the rest of the values. Here's the light environment fully set up, and I also changed the skybox texture itself. And to do this you go to map, map properties, and then change the skybox texture name to whatever you change it to. Here it is in game. You can now see there's lighting coming from the skybox texture, and the skybox texture is now different, and there's shadows everywhere there isn't skybox lighting. If you're making your first map, I recommend just making as much of it as you can to be outdoors, so you don't really have to worry about the lighting. I noticed underneath the platforms were a bit dark, so say I want to lighten those up a bit, and I need some more entities, so I'm just going to copy this, Control C, Control V, double click, and I'm going to change this to a light. There are a bunch of lighting entities. I'm not going to go into detail over them, but I will link a tutorial in the description if you want to learn more about lighting. So there are a bunch of settings here. If you Google light entity, you can learn more about every setting there is, not just to the light entity, but to any entity inside Hammer. But for my purposes, I just want to change the brightness, so I'm going to change the color, and actually this orange is good enough, I'd say. These four numbers here from left to right are your red, green, blue, and your brightness values. And from experience, this number is too high, I can tell. And I'm just going to change it to 100 because I think that will be a good number. So now I just want to put 2 copies underneath the platforms of this lighting entity. So I'm just going to drag this underneath. And I'm moving pretty hastily. It doesn't really have to be perfect for this tutorial. And there we go. Now there are 2 lights underneath the platforms. Here's what it looks like in game. It looks kind of weird to be honest, but it's good enough. Next I want to talk about these 3 buttons, Groups, Objects, Solids, in the top right. So I've made 3 boxes here, and I've grouped them together, so if I select any one of them, it will select all 3 because I have the Groups button checked. Now I also made the 2 blue boxes of Funk Detail, so if I go to the Objects button and I check that, and select just one of the 2 blue boxes, it will select the Funk Detail. And I can also select just one of the 2 blue boxes by changing to the Solids button, and there we go. And note that I can't access the Funk Detail properties while the Solids button is checked. Grouping is used to make mapping more efficient, and you should be able to toggle in between those 3 buttons seamlessly. For instance, this hollow box here is a group. Say I want to select just one side, I can go to solids and select just one side. To group things together, first make sure the groups button is checked, and then once you have your selections that you want to group, just hit Control and G and that will group them together. Now selecting either the platform or the box will just select it all. To ungroup, I actually don't know the hotkey. It's this button right here in the top toolbar, and that will ungroup it. In testing this jump, I noticed earlier that the two side walls are not needed in successfully making the jump. So what I can do is forbid the players from being able to shoot these two walls. There are a couple ways to do this, and the easiest in my opinion is to use an entity called Funk No Grenades. So I'm going to copy this wall and make it 1 unit thick right next to the wall, and then I'm going to retexture with trigger, Shift A. And by the way, if you have this little checkbox checked in the corner, it will only show the textures that you've used so far. So trigger texture, apply. Now I want to tie this to a Funk No Grenades. So I'm going to search for Funk No Grenades, and there it is, apply, and that's it. Here it is in game, and you'll see I also changed the floor to a different dev just for aesthetic purposes. And if I shoot at the wall, my rockets will get eaten up by the Funk No Grenades. And I also added a Funk No Grenades to the other wall while I was at it. And actually, stickies still explode on the wall, but you can fix this easily by cranking up the width of the Funk No Grenades. The other way to prevent people from shooting the wall is to use Player Clip, and Player Clip is a tools texture, so I'm gonna reapply the texture. And by the way, if you search tools in the filter, you'll bring up all the tools textures, and you want Player Clip. The unique thing about Player Clip is that anything textured with it will be shoot-throughable. You can shoot through it, but you can't walk through it. Now, even though I re-textured it, it's still a Funk No Grenades, which means it will still eat up the rocket. So I need to hit this button right here, to world, and this will untie it from an entity and move it into world geometry. Now I'm just going to do the same to the other Funk No Grenades, so browse Player Clip, and then I gotta move it to the world. So to world, and there it is. It's not an entity anymore. Now I'm gonna drag it out so it acts as an invisible wall that doesn't let me get close to the blue dev wall. Now I'm not a fan of invisible walls, and you should not be either, so I'm gonna go ahead and copy this out and retexture the two visible sides. So I'm gonna apply no draw, and then I'm gonna go and look for glass, and it brings up glass textures. I'm just gonna choose this one and apply it to the visible faces. And then I need to tie this to a Funk Illusionary, which means it won't be solid to bullets or the player, so you can walk right through it and you can shoot right through it. And then I'm just gonna place this right on top of the Player Clip. In game, there's now glass on the sides that I can shoot through but cannot walk through. And likewise, stickies will go right through the glass. Basically, any projectile. And while I'm on the topic of messing around with the walls, I will show you how to make a wall that stickies will bounce off of. So I'm just going to copy this and browse, no draw, and then I'm going to tie this to a Funk brush, and I'm going to change the render mode to do not render, and that will make the compiler skip over this block when it goes to compile. In game, if I shoot stickies at this wall, they will now bounce off of it because of that Funk brush, and it's still solid to rockets though, so I can rocket jump off this wall still. So you may be asking yourself, why not just make the wall itself a Funk brush, this wall right here, but there's a problem with this, and that is that it creates a leak. A leak can occur when your map is not fully sealed off from the void, and there's many different ways this can happen. One way a leak can occur is such as in this instance, where I have a Funk brush as my wall separating my map from the void. You must make all of your outside walls that connect to the void to be world geometry. So I'm going to move this into world geometry by hitting the to world button while this is selected again. And it actually ungrouped my box, so I'm just going to group it real quick. Control G. Another way a leak can occur is if you just simply have a hole in your map somewhere. So for instance, if I just lower this, that will leave a hole connecting to the void and therefore a leak. You can get a leak as well if you texture an outer wall that seals off the void with a transparent texture such as glass. So right here, this will create a leak. And another way a leak can occur is if the origin of a block-based entity lies in the void. So for instance, if you select a block-based entity, you'll see this blue circle in the center, and if I just drag that out into the void, that will create a leak. Even though my level is completely sealed off, it's still a leak. The easiest way to check if your map has a leak is to compile your map and change rad to no and viz to fast, and this will make compile time really short even if your map is huge. And then you go to map, load point file, and this window will pop up. If you have a leak, you say yes, and it draws this red line indicating where the leak is. In this case, it's the origin of the teleport entity. So if I just move that back inside and then compile again and then load point file again, and if you don't have a leak, this open window will pop up, and that means you're good to go. You should check every so often if your map has leaks. I'd say after every major change you make to it. Leaks are something you definitely want to avoid. If you have a leak, sometimes your map won't even compile correctly. In game, if it does manage to compile correctly, it will just be really glitchy, and yeah, you can't play on a map that has a leak. Now I want to talk about the compiler settings that you have. Basically leave run BSP on normal all the time pretty much, and run viz you should leave on normal or fast. Normal for your final map compile, fast is okay for testing. You may experience some FPS issues or other minor glitches on a map that's compiled with fast viz, but usually it's okay for testing. And as expected, if you leave viz on fast, you will greatly speed up your compile time. And then there's the rad aspect of the compiler, which controls the lighting. So if I set it to no, which I have it on right now, it will default to full bright lighting, and it will basically just ignore my light environment and two light entities. In game, it looks like everything is illuminated equally and there are no shadows, and overall it's just a bit harsh, which is why I tend to set up my light environment first thing. And like viz, there's the normal and fast. Normal, once again, should be used for your final compile, but for testing, fast is good enough, though you might see the occasional lighting error or two. And there's also the HDR option, which I'm not going to get into, but basically it's an additional lighting option you have. I recommend just ignoring it for now. I mean, none of my 4 maps use it. It's certainly not necessary, so unless you want to explore additional options for lighting, just don't worry about it. So to summarize, if you want to have super fast compile time but still be able to test it, use this setup, and although the lighting will be full bright, it's still playable. And if you want to test it with lighting, just change it to fast, and also for your final compile, set everything to normal. So that wraps it up for this part of the tutorial. In the next part, I'm just going to be making my second jump to this map, and it will be a harder jump, so you can see what goes into making an intermediate level soldier jump. Alright, I'm out. Peace!